domestic violence or intimate partner violence, as well as what's taking place in the maternal infant health world, we need to make sure that people are aware, especially perinatal or any healthcare providers, are aware that they may have had some trauma. But also, even if they're not sure or don't know that they had trauma, just the data and the reports they're showing, how women are being treated in the OB-GYN's office or in the medical field. And so I highly suggest that training will be ongoing and it would be mandatory. And there is something that BWW, Black Women for Wellness, authored and co-authored a bill, SB 464, and that is the Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth bill, and making sure that healthcare providers have to take implicit bias training, and that the state of California would make sure that they track and publish data around maternal death and any severe morbidity. And so I think that, Black Women for Wellness and the reproductive justice world field is already thinking about that. We probably have not used the terms trauma informed, but I think that this is in alignment with making sure that people are aware that trauma informed approaches is very important when you're providing supports to individuals that are bringing life into this world, but also want to be treated with some dignity and some respect when they go to these doctors' offices.
Thank you both for those well thought out and rich answers. I wanted to, since we started moving a little bit into policy discussions, I wanted to talk a little bit about the effects of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and specifically the clients that we may start to see or have started to see in California, because there are now 14 states that no longer offer abortion services. So there's a total ban in 14 states, but how has that impacted your work in California? And since both of you discussed community organizing and political engagement, how has that shaped your political engagement and some of the policies you work on? And we'll start with Adrienne and then move to Becca.
Well, when SB 8 was passed in Texas, the abortion ban, and when the Supreme Court decided to kick it back to the state of Texas, that was heart-wrenching. I don't know if a lot of people understand when states have so much power, and to be able to just take down a federal law, a constitutional law, and say, hey, we decide that we no longer want this to be a law. And so when that took place, I'll never forget when it came down, I had to go to West LA to a press conference, and just thinking about how that bill and that law basically was pushing us back to history and the purpose of history so it won't repeat itself. And looking at the fact that women were now going to have to go underground to get an abortion. Looking at the fact that, the state of Texas, that abortion ban, it allowed other states and some of those other 14 states or 13 states to copycat that law. And also, once again, that's where the personal bodily autonomy comes in. And it was just taken away for, women who want to get an abortion. A lot of people don't have the funds, the time, or the means to travel for an abortion. And the fact that SB 8 became a law of the land, it calls for more policies to be made. And so now here in the state of California, we have SB 345, and that is the law that would help individuals to come from other states seeking medical support or abortion access or other medical services that SB 8 or the abortion ban has alleviated and has outlawed. But the state of California has SB 345, and that's where it's telehealth, where other individuals can come from other states and utilize reproductive health services here in the state of California. BWW was instrumental in that, as well as other organizations here in the state of California. And they worked really fast to look at ways to protect individuals who needed abortions. and for the state of California to truly be a sanctuary state. And we are still viewed as a reproductive freedom state, but we know that if we don't continue to advocate and stay on top of things, that could go away as well. I hope I answered your question.
Good. Becca?
Yeah, definitely. So as Adrienne mentioned, that Texas SB8 law, when that went into effect before the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we noticed that we already were getting a drastic increase of patients coming from out of state. So that was in September of 2021. And since then, just at our Planned Parenthood Marmonte affiliate, we've seen a 406% increase in patients who are traveling from other states to get abortion care through us. And, you know, also, like as Adrienne mentioned, like just because abortion is illegal, it doesn't mean that people aren't still going to get them. We definitely have safer options for people to have self-managed abortions with the medication abortion pills. But, you know, those are also getting under attack right now with the recent mifepristone ruling in Texas, trying to revoke the FDA's approval of that. And so it's just, our opposition is kind of working in ways to confuse people and just throw things at us that we have to take on to divert our attention from kind of working proactively. Now we're reacting to all these other things that are happening, which is exceptionally difficult. So here we've really been working on trying to make sure that the folks that are coming in from out of state, their privacy is being protected. So we've been working on a lot of state bills that would, you know, protect people's data privacy. That's something that's like really new to us, like geo tracking. I just saw this morning that there was a girl from Idaho that just got arrested for seeking an abortion out of state, and they did that through geo tracking of her data. So those are things that we're working on here in California. And as the landscape kind of like plays out, we're learning like how we need to approach it because it's such new territory. But we've passed a lot of bills that have really protected folks in that way. I also did want to talk about these abortion bans that we're seeing in other states that make those narrow exceptions for incest and rape. And I think a lot of people can look at that and think that that's somewhat of a win, that those exceptions are being made. But when we actually think about like how those exceptions are put into practice, it's not very realistic. No. 2/3 of sexual assault cases are not ever reported. Yeah, that's because people don't trust the police to, you know, believe them or do anything about it. They might know the perpetrator, and that just like further complicates wanting to go to authorities about those things. And we know that the authorities aren't necessarily there for the survivor. So when you need to retrieve some kind of like police report for something that's still under investigation, that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of hoops to jump through, and you just don't have time when you're pregnant and seeking an abortion. This is a time-sensitive thing, and it's a lot of like life admin stuff during a time where you're already experiencing like a very recent trauma, and it's just it's too much, and it doesn't actually work. So you know, those exceptions just aren't really realistic. So yeah.
I would like to piggyback off of that. So the name, I want to give the actual name for SB 345, which is Healthcare Services, Legally Protected Healthcare Activities. And that also came about because of the bounty hunter clause that's in SB 8 of the abortion ban, meaning that if an individual, a woman, goes to another state seeking abortion care, she could be arrested, or someone can, you know, report that person, and then they can be arrested and brought back to their state. So once again, that's sort of like the underground, with Harriet Tubman. If you a runaway slave, now you have to go to another state, and then if they find you, you got to go back. They had bounty hunters, back then, and so that made me think of that, and as well as the abortion ban. Now it's like everyone is looking to see if someone is pregnant and how they can criminalize them if they decide not to move forward. And I also want to say that we have all these abortion bans in all these states that are totally against abortions, but some of those same states have some of the highest infant maternal mortality. Some of those same states have maternal deserts. Some of those same states have sent back money for the Affordable Care Act and decided not to take the Obamacare or whatever term that they use. And so on one hand, they are all for life, liberty and justice, but for the people and the families that decide that they want to move forward with building their families and going through their pregnancy and hoping and praying that they have a healthy baby, the mom is going to be healthy, the family is going to be able to be a family, those same states do not support them in those endeavors. And so this is how we know that this is all about power. This is not about a concern about family and life. Especially if you're criminalizing an individual if they decide that they want to exercise personal bodily autonomy. And I also want to state, using the clause that if it is, incest or rape, I totally agree with Becca, because as a country as a whole, we do not even support victims or survivors of sexual abuse. DV there's still a lot of weeds, and so I think they use that as a crutch, and it's a smokescreen.
Thank you for that. That brought up so many questions. I want to just lean into one part of what you said. Both of you mentioned that there are other services that people end up missing out on when they're seeking healthcare. So I wanted to dig in a little deeper and find out what other kinds of reproductive healthcare might people miss out on because of the abortion bans, or how are those services linked? So, for example, if the exception is only for rape or incest, then the health of the mother, how does that come into play? Or are there, and there might be only a few cases where there are other things that can look like an abortion, but it's not an abortion, but it ends up not being covered. Mm-hmm. There might be, I don't know, just other kinds of reproductive services that could fall under these abortion bans, and that also impacts health of those seeking care. Mm-hmm. And we'll start, I've lost track. We'll start with Adrienne.
So one of the things that I think about, just general, OB-GYN appointments, right? A pap smear, a DNC, those things are no longer allowed. They are questioning that, even if you want to use IUD for contraceptive purposes. And so I shared, this new law with members of my prayer group. And I'm like one of the youngest ones in this prayer group. And just sharing that abortion is defined totally different from decades ago. And the fact that if a woman has a fetus and it's an unlived fetus, there is really not support for her to be able to have that unlived fetus removed. There's an expectation she would carry that baby, that fetus to term. I'm thinking about so many reproductive health services that women would need that is now being questioned or under or within the purview of an abortion ban. And so when women can't get just regular appointments fulfilled or appointments or strategies from their healthcare providers, that is going to, unfortunately, probably cause that woman or that individual to have additional medical concerns. And it probably could have been something, small, but now it could become something critical. And those are the concerns that I have. Mammograms, or the fact that Planned Parenthood is being demonized because people think they only perform abortions, but there's so many other things that they provide, so many other services that they provide that some individuals cannot afford. So, for instance, birth control pills. Excuse me. Now, thanks to the IBIS Reproductive Health Organization and their coalition of other organizations, they fought for over-the-counter birth control pills. People don't realize that that's a privilege to be able to have a doctor, make an appointment for a doctor, pay a co-payment, get a prescription for birth control pills, and then go pay for it. Planned Parenthood was an actual healthcare provider that help women navigate through that. And so when I think about what you just asked, everything that women thought was just a part of our health and we had access to, and services would be provided, that's no longer a privilege. It's no longer provided. Everything is in question now.
Becca?
Yeah, I think as far as like the abortion bans go, when we have politicians who know nothing about the medical field making laws about medical procedures, they don't know what they're talking about. That's essentially it. Is so they make this rule that once a fetus is viable, you can't get an abortion. What does viability actually look like? It looks very like the term late term abortion isn't really applicable to the way medical professionals look at pregnancy. It looks different. There's different phases for different people. And I think that a huge mistake here is when we let politicians say, oh, well, the exception is if the pregnant person's life is at risk. What does that actually mean in a medical sense? Does that mean I have to be like seconds away from death, or that there's a serious problem here? We've heard stories about people going to the hospital hemorrhaging and they were sent home because these doctors, these medical professionals are scared to provide this care, even though they know that this person needs this care. Because what does that mean for their profession? Are they going to lose their license? Are they no longer going to be able to practice? Are they going to get into legal trouble? All those things. And the simple fact of the matter is, like, politicians don't belong in our doctors' offices. We need to be making those decisions with our doctors who are going to help us make that collaborative decision for our healthcare plan. So I think that is like a huge problem. Also, alongside these abortion bans, we're seeing all of these other attacks on contraceptives and sexual health education and all these things, and they're really damaging the ability for health centers to be operating in some communities. And while they may used to have provided abortion, they don't provide it anymore, but they provide all these other health services that these rural communities don't have access to from any other health center. They need to go to a reproductive health center to get this care. And now those clinics are shutting down because they can't keep their doors open. So now they have nothing in this area, in this rural area that they live. So I think those are like the two major things that I would bring up.
And Tonisha, may I say something also? I think also there is a misnomer. People think reproductive justice reproductive health only deals with and only focuses on abortions, not realizing there's so many other areas that is covered and so many other areas that advocacy is needed around reproductive justice and reproductive health.
Thank you both. And Becca, since you touched on looking at rural health and access to healthcare, and again, not just for abortion services, but multiple kinds of healthcare. And Adrienne just mentioned that reproductive justice is much broader. I wanted to talk about the economic mobility and linking this conversation that we have now started to move towards, which is around access to education, to family planning, and even this idea that oftentimes folks who are presented as pro-life in this conversation don't think about the quality of life once a child is born, or even the care that happens to the mother. So how do we then start to look at economic mobility for people who might not have the best access to reproductive care? And let's take the example of those rural communities. What might someone's life look like if they don't get access to the care that you're talking about, Becca? We'll start with you and then we'll move to Adrienne.
Yeah, so I think one interesting thing for people to know is that around 60% of women, and I'm using women here because that's what the data is, it's very gendered in that way, but 60% of women who seek abortions already have children, at least one child at home. So they already know what it takes to be a parent. They know the time and the energy and the financial needs and the emotional capacity and the social capacity to take care of children. And forcing somebody to have a child can have like very severe effects on somebody's mental health. Everybody, like, if you want to be a parent, you want to be a good parent. And even if you're prepared to be a parent, you're ready for it, it's already hard enough. And so if you're trying to do the best that you can and you're working within the constraints of living in poverty, living far from healthcare services, it's only going to impact your sense of self. And I think, like, as far as like economic mobility goes, women already get paid less than men. Women of color get paid less than that. So there's already a disadvantage there. And when you are pregnant or you have children, it's harder to advance in your career. It's harder to stay in school. There's not really many resources or services for students who have children on college campuses. A lot of employers don't really make it very easy for people to have children. Breastfeeding can be a very hard thing to do if you're at work and there's not really a place for you to get that privacy that you need. So it just kind of all like plays into each other.
Yeah.
Adrienne?
Can you repeat it again for me?
Sure. This question is really about economic mobility and looking at the negative impacts of not having access to reproductive health care. And so not just abortion care, but all the care that we've talked about. What are some of the negative impacts? How does it impact access to education, parenting, mental health?
Yeah, so, I think people have to realize that we really do reside in a capitalistic society. And, some people say money isn't everything, but we know it makes things easier. And we know that if you do not have a good income or access, that the services that you need, they're just not going to be available. So I'm always concerned when people say, oh, well, just work harder and you will make the money and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. At the end of the day, this economy is moving. Inflation is increasing rapidly. And if an individual woman states that she does not want to have a child, that should be her prerogative. But I think also we have to think about economically, medical insurance costs money. So most people can't get medical insurance unless you get it through your jobs. Some jobs don't offer it. Some of us are quite privileged where a job does offer it. I think we also have to think about being able to have housing. That goes back to one of the 4 principles of reproductive justice, being able to raise your children in a safe and sustainable environment with human dignity. And so if we don't have access to good income, it's going to be challenging to do any of that. So this is one thing we talk about, the wage gap, as Becca stated. And so I think that when we don't have access to income, we can't build wealth and we can't even enjoy the essentials of life. And so that's a conversation that we really need to take a look at. One thing I do want to say is here in the state of California, they do have the guaranteed income. That's a new program that is assisting pregnant people or individuals that have low income, and they can get some extra income to help them with those, basic needs of living. Also for individuals that receive, WIC or Medi-Cal, it will not cause, it won't go against them if they are able to utilize the guaranteed income program. And so I just think that economic mobility is hard for women because we reside in this country, as Becca stated. Our income isn't where it could be or should be, especially for Black women. And so the conversation needs to be, how do we make sure or ensure that women are able to be paid just as much as, their male counterparts?
Adrienne, I have a question from an audience member who says, Adrienne, you broke down the historical context of abortion inaccessibility. In what ways does the history of forced sterilization of Black women and girls in the U.S. play a role in the work that Black Women for Wellness commits itself to?
Once again, we're committed, this organization is committed to the health and wellness outcomes for Black women and Black girls. Excuse me. And one thing I would tell anyone, I really love the fact that I work for Black Women for Wellness, because we could say Black women. Some areas or arenas, they want you to change it and don't want us to say Black women. But our history here in America is quite different from others. And if we don't address that or recognize it, it's going to be challenging to change that and to make it better. And so looking at historically what happened to Black women when our ancestors were stolen from the continent of Africa and brought here, we were brought here, forced to have babies, because they were the commodities. We were forced, it's rape. I have a friend of mine who stated that she went to an event at a library in Tennessee, and this white, white gentleman wrote a book, and he read something out of his book, and he said white men during slavery had a peculiar interest in having sex with Black women. In actuality, that's called rape. And so looking at, and some people don't like the term that we use, underground, when the abortion ban became an actual law, because it's for Black women, we were not able to even have a say over our bodies since we came over here. Our ancestors came over here, and now it's like history repeating itself. And so once again, Black women are fighting for personal bodily autonomy, having the right to make a decision if they want to bear a child or not. And historically, that has not been afforded to Black women. It just has not. We know that there was forced sterilization. We know that there was rape. We know that Black women were forced to have babies. And once again, they want to force Black women to have babies if they choose otherwise. So it's both and that Black women have to deal with when it comes to our decision around reproductive justice, reproductive health, and looking at the history of Black women in this country.
I'd also like to point out that during the crack epidemic, which was another opioid crisis, there was also a history in the US of sterilizing and criminalizing folks who were addicted and offering to pay them money to get sterilized during a time when they were in addiction. And then also in the state of California, they were sterilizing female prisoners up until 2009. So, and we know that Black women are overrepresented in prisons. So that is another area in the state of California where there is some improvement that still needs to be made, because 2009 was just a short time ago for us to consider that people were being sterilized in this state. Becca, did you want to add any thoughts or comments around this issue of forced sterilization and how that connects to economic mobility?
I think you both really knocked it on the head there. I guess I would also mention that there, like in ICE detention centers, we're also seeing that forced sterilization is something that is still happening, but is very underground and not really spoken about because these folks are in a detention center and aren't provided the rights that they should be provided. So it's still something that happens.
Definitely. And that is really troubling. I think one of the other questions that was already, I think, mentioned when we started to talk about mental health, but this issue of postpartum and mental health support. There are some fairly recent research around postpartum depression or psychosis, and the extent of it, that it can last pretty long, up to I think around age 7 for the child. The mother's condition around after giving birth. So how are those kinds of services being impacted now in your work, when we start to think about those who post delivery of a child, or having, creating their families? How does the mental health of the mother, how are those services being impacted by a lot of these policy changes that we're seeing? And we'll start with, who did I end with last? Let's start with Becca.
So at Marmonte, we don't necessarily provide those services. So I will let Adrienne kind of expand on that.
Yeah. So Black Women for Wellness, we do not provide direct services. We are truly an advocacy organization, but we do work closely with AIM. Excuse me. And AIM is an organization or a initiative, African American Infant Maternal Oh, I feel bad. How did I forget the name? Well, it's here in LA County, and it's mainly South LA. And I'm gonna get this name because I feel really bad. We work closely with them, and they work closely with the maternal mental health organization. It's an organization that focuses on maternal mental health. And what I appreciate about that is they understand that postpartum depression is real. They understand that everybody isn't happy and having these great reveal parties. There is some women or individuals that don't have that joy that people just automatically think people will embody when they're pregnant. And that's okay if they don't. And then there's some support for that. So I know that there are individuals, organizations, and systems that focus to address those concerns that pregnant individuals or may encounter, and they have full support for them before, during, and after.
Another question that we have is really around seeking some of the barriers that different marginalized communities may experience in seeking reproductive health care. So we know we've definitely talked about Black women and some of the barriers they experience. Becca just talked about folks in detention centers who are being, who have been where forced sterilization is occurring. So for some other marginalized communities, folks with disabilities, mental health challenges, folks who don't speak English and may not speak even Spanish or one of the major languages where there are translators or where there tends to be more advocacy available. What are some of those barriers that we might be seeing? Or even when we consider for Black women, oftentimes the term Black, people just assume African Americans, but not necessarily other types of Black people, and what those barriers, what barriers those other women might experience. So we'll start with Adrienne. Some barriers that are experienced by different marginalized groups.
I think that there's a lack of cultural framework. I think that you made a great point when you said Black people may automatically equate that to African Americans here in America, but not thinking about people from the Caribbean, Black people from the Caribbean, or Black people from the continent of Africa. Also thinking about Spanish speaking people may assume that they're all from Mexico, not realizing they're that's a huge demographic. They could be from Ecuador or Cuba. And so I think sometimes just not having the cultural framework, sometimes not even having the patience to want to even work with that particular individual and trying to understand what their needs really are. I don't know if there's enough interpretation services also for the deaf community. And so I think, once again, we have to take a look at the broad spectrum of patients and what is probably needed. Yes, interpretation services, but interpretation services, but also do the medical field, do they really have the time? Are they putting forth the effort to provide good quality care and where it's equitable? And if they don't understand, they have a colleague or someone in that building that can support them, or making sure that they have the services or whatever they need to provide for that individual before they even come to receive the services or the care. And so I think that it's all about preparation. Just like, they call to make sure that you still coming to your doctor's appointment, maybe a week ahead of time or the week of. I think that those same, that needs to be implemented as well. And so I know that there's a lot of barriers. I mean, there's barriers for people to speak English. There's barriers for U.S. citizens going to doctors' offices. And so I can only imagine other individuals that have other challenges or, have a need for specialties to assist them properly.
Becca?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the barriers that people with disabilities might be facing. I used to work with an organization that supported adults that had intellectual or learning disabilities. And one thing that I really, really was really brought to light through that experience was that a lot of times folks with disabilities are seen as like asexual beings that don't have feelings and urges and like needs to be like held by another human being, and that's just not true. They need sexual health services, and oftentimes they might not be able to make decisions on their own through like legally binding documents, which is problematic in some ways. That means you're taking away that person's bodily autonomy. And forced sterilization happens in that population as well, which is just absolutely ridiculous because people who do like elect into sterilization have so many barriers to do that. A lot of times, like you'll have to do waiting periods and counseling and all these things to make sure, oh, you don't actually want to be a parent. But then people who might actually want to be parents are forced the other direction.
Yeah.
And then also, I think like when we take a look at children too, a lot of times like they aren't children, minors, teenagers, young folks aren't really aware of all of the resources around them. They don't know all the rules that are protecting like sensitive services like reproductive health care or like substance abuse, all those things. They don't really realize that they have a right to privacy for that. And so it really restricts young folks' ability to or comfort to seek the care that they need.
I also want to add, it goes back to the SB 464 that I shared, California Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act. Once again, making sure that, doctors and healthcare providers, take the implicit bias training and make sure that it's ongoing. Senator, I think her name is Sydney Kamlacher, she just made sure she was instrumental in that bill being passed, but also instrumental in making sure that it's just not a bill that's just going to be sitting, right? And want to make sure that it's put into action. And I just feel like if these doctors or healthcare professionals, they went to school for years to learn their craft. And it's just as important for them to learn a new craft of making sure they provide services with some dignity to individuals that have different backgrounds, different needs, and even if it is extra, they need to figure out a way to support them.
We have another question from the audience, and then we're nearing time. So we'll answer this question and then give you all time to give your closing thoughts. This audience member said, this is a powerful and vital conversation, and thanks us for holding the space, and wants to know, in what ways are your organizations addressing domestic violence and abortion needs? And how will advocates get around arrest for supporting survivors who seek abortion? And so we'll start with Becca here.
Yeah, so one really incredible thing that we have at Marmonte, it's more on like the cultural organizing kind of side of things, but we have I'm spacing on the actual title of the program, an artist in residence, who created this really incredible project around different people's experience with domestic violence through different photos and different stories that are being shared. And I think that it really really addresses like the social aspects of destigmatizing domestic violence in our communities, and abortion as well. We haven't necessarily dived too much into like the policy side of things. As far as I know, I'm somewhat new at Planned Parenthood, so it's definitely something that I would like to explore more as we continue. But for the second part of the question, how will advocates get around arrest? So like I mentioned before, a lot of the legislation that we've been lobbying around has been to address this issue, to make it so like hostile states or government private folks can't actually obtain medical records from folks who are seeking abortions here. There is the California Future of Abortion Council, which pulls together a bunch of different bills for a bill package that will really, address abortion access from a holistic approach. So it includes a lot of bills that kind of approach that question as well.
So it goes back to SB 345, the FAB, which is the Future Abortions Council that our policy director is a part of, and some of my other colleagues as well. And that is, healthcare services, making sure is legally protected healthcare activities. So the advocates will be protected along with this law. And another reason the law is put in place is just in case other individuals come from other states as well, and how, people that work here in California cannot be arrested or charged from, out of state law enforcement. So that is one way, and having all these different organizations and coalitions working together to ensure that the support will still be here as California is this reproductive freedom state. It was something else about DV, domestic violence.
Oh, sorry, I just closed the question. Let me see if I can pull it back up. Yes. In what ways are your organizations addressing domestic violence and abortion needs?
Okay, so Black Women for Wellness, currently now we are part of this grant called HOME. It's a cohort, yes. Housing opportunities mean everything. And so it's a cohort of about 10 organizations throughout the state of California. And most of them are domestic violence or deal with family violence, sort of like the Family Violence Law Center in Oakland. And so Black Women for Wellness, we're the only reproductive justice organization that is a part of this particular grant. And so we are showing the relationship between reproductive justice principles and everything that this grant is focusing on. And the grant focuses on domestic violence victims, survivors that are homeless, and also the gender expansive community. And, one of our principles is, being able to raise your children or family in a safe and sustainable environment with some human dignity. And so now we're looking at the fact that some domestic violence victims, sometimes they do not become victims of domestic violence until they're pregnant. There's research that shows that. The March of Dimes have some of that information as well. And so we are now making sure that we interject everything that we are asked to do as a member of this cohort, the HOME cohort, that we're also implementing that in our work and showing that there really is an interconnection, and that domestic violence victims or intimate partner victims unfortunately have some co-occurring identities, homelessness, maybe pregnant, and just wanted to make sure that we could cover all these different identities and support them with the coalition of home and other organizations like Planned Parenthood. How do we bring the meetings of the mind together to support individuals that have these co-occurring identities?
Yes, thank you for the shout out, Miss Adrienne. We are also part of the home cohort, so thank you for that. It's been some really great work. And we also are on the communications subcommittee together. So I hope all of you look out for some of our messaging, and we will likely be inviting you to offer us feedback on the messages that we're developing around these issues. And so before I go off and run off like a train, I did want to give our panelists an opportunity to give some of their closing thoughts on the discussion today around economic mobility for survivors of domestic violence through the lens of reproductive justice across the lifespan. So again, we're looking birth to death at ways that economic mobility is impacted by reproductive justice. And so Becca, we'll start with you if you want to give us some of your closing thoughts on this topic today.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor. I think that it's just really important that we take a look at how reproductive and sexual health care is important throughout the whole lifespan, because every single person that comes through our doors, not every single person, sorry, but the people that come through our doors, they could have children. And if they're bringing their children here to get care, we're helping them. And in return, they're going home with a healthier family. And that's going to help them move forward in whatever way that it is. And as far as like the domestic violence playing a role in seeking that reproductive health care, is like, we really, really need to be sensitive in the way that we deliver our services and acknowledge that while the children might not be experiencing some kind of abuse, if they're seeing it, it's going to affect them later on in their life. And if we can help somebody get connected to the resources and the service that they need earlier on, we're just helping them and their kids and their future generations go. So it's all generational. So I'll leave it at.
Thank you again for inviting me here and being able to represent Black Women for Wellness. I think that we also have to think about the economic disparities that come along with being a victim of domestic violence. We know that financial abuse is a part of it. We know that homelessness, unfortunately, is being recognized more and more, why some women and children are homeless, and is due to the fact that they are fleeing violence and abuse. And we know that it's hard to catch up. I mean, I know women that are doing well, they're middle class, upper middle class, and they're, frowning at the cost of gas and inflation and the cost of eggs going up to $7. So imagine a victim of domestic violence with her children, or even without the challenges of starting over all the time, or not being able to build your own economic security for yourself. And so I think that these conversations need to continue, and we need to most definitely continue to have conversations with our policy colleagues. And Tanisha, you are the policy person over there, and looking at how can policy and practice come together to help ensure that victims of domestic violence or gender-based violence will be able to have some income and build, have some type of financial security. It's a challenge if you're fleeing, or you're too afraid, or you don't have the freedom to even, keep the money that you earn, or to go out and earn money and call it yours and have some type of plan, for your future. And we know that more and more women are becoming homeless in the ages of 50, 55. The research is showing that. The gender equity report came out about here in California, and there are more women the age that they should be retiring and going to have brunch and hang out at a water aerobics class. They're homeless, or they don't have the funds to remain where they are, or they're on the verge of being evicted. So I think that, we should really continue to have these conversations and be solution focused and be unapologetic of what we ask for to ensure that women are not going to be homeless, especially with their children.
Thank you both for joining us for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you for agreeing to be our expert speakers. You did a great job. We appreciate the audience and just look forward to seeing you join us for our work as we advocate for survivors of gender-based violence, for reproductive justice, for the homeless, and for other folks who are experiencing harm in our communities. This concludes our program for today, and this concludes our domestic violence awareness campaign this month. Thank you and have a good rest of your day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.